All right, we've got another amazing episode here on the Phantom Podcast. I'm Nabil Ahmed, co-founder and CEO of Phantom Foods. Before we get into meeting our great guest here, John, I want to give a quick background for anybody who's a new listener. On the Phantom Podcast, we like to highlight the innovators, the leaders, the investors, the operators in the food industry because it's been a crazy 2 years. And I have a belief that we're almost taking the food industry for granted. So let's have a conversation around who's making what happen. And today we have John from Chifa, but that doesn't encompass him completely. I think you're a man of many layers. But before I ruin this podcast, I want to give it off to John to do a quick intro on himself, and we'll take it from there.
Well, thank you, Nabil. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm flattered that you're interested at all. Said I'm relatively new to this industry, so just getting any attention is good.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, John. Not to interrupt the intro at
No,
all.
no, no, not at all.
You have a pretty good digital footprint, right? You look up John at Chifa. I'm telling you, you're up there with people who've been in the industry for 20 plus years. So you're looking at it the right approach. But before I ruin this, why don't you
No, no.
continue?
And I have to live up to that. I mean, I'll have to say, I'm part of a really tight team, which is comprised largely of family and close friends. That is I'm kind of standing on their shoulders. My brother-in-law, my wife, my mother-in-law, and my friends are all involved in this. So any attention that I'm getting, credit goes to the team. And I think a lot of it said my brother-in-law, who was is the founder of Opening Ceremony, the fashion brand, and was creative director for Kenzo for a number of years, which is one of the LVMH brands. He's kind of behind the design and the marketing bit. So I have to give all the credit to him for a lot of the attention that we get. So it's definitely not sort of just a solo thing. But I'm lucky to be in this position.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about your brother-in-law, right? And he's
Yeah.
the co-founder of Opening Ceremony. Um, and it's really interesting because when you think about food, personally for me, and this is just my opinions on it, it's almost an art form in kind of how it's created. If you're watching the kitchen, people in the back of the house kind of moving around, making sure mise en place is ready. Even just to the prep that goes into it is almost an art. To how it's plated, to how it even comes out to the customer. So in reality, I would almost say that was, a match made in heaven, right? This is the cross section of two different types of art forms, right? It's your brother-in-law's mindset coming into the food intersection, and Chifa is probably not born. From what I understand, that comes from generations of tradition.
Yeah, it's if I could sort of paint the whole sort of picture, it's really the four principles. So it's my mother-in-law, who is from the food industry. She had a restaurant in Lima, Peru, called Chifa Calway. So this is kind of a 2.0 version. So she's not only been part of the legacy in terms of the recipes, but she's laid the foundation for the restaurant business part of it. So we're not completely coming in cold and blind.
Mm-hmm.
And then the day to day really it's what I call the triad. So it's my wife Rika, who serves as the CEO. She has multiple businesses beyond this. Real estate investment is one of them. So she's the business end of it. So it's kind of between, if you look, my mother-in-law kind of laid the foundation. My wife runs the business aspect of it. My brother-in-law is sort of the face and the creative marketing side of it. I'm on the food side of it. So we feel like between the four of us, that's really kind of helped us kind of move things along, and we counter each other. But if you think about it, a triangle along with a circle is a really strong shape, right? And I think that's kind of why I think we've been able to move kind of fairly quickly. But the way I see it is that it's really the group effort. between the four of us to launch this, and then everyone else that we've brought in to really make it a reality day in, day out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like making a movie. It's creative, but the hundreds and thousands of people that are behind it
Mm-hmm.
really is what makes it. And so
Yeah.
I think the same goes for uh, for Chifa. It's
Yeah.
a balance between the creative and the business, the reality of the business. Right.
Mm-hmm. It's that brick by brick layer that you guys are kind of applying here, which is really cool. But tell me a little bit more about yourself. I know you've got an interesting history. So let's start with anywhere you want to start from, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, it's kind of gone full circle. I guess the best way to sort of start, without kind of launching into some chronological timeline, is kind of what drives me. So I would kind of describe myself in what I call the F's.
Mm-hmm.
So what I am about is family and friends, and my passions beyond that are food and film,
Mm-hmm.
and all that to me equals fun. If I'm engaged in any of that, it's going to be fun. It has to be fun. So if I start out with that as sort of my driver in terms of what kind of moves me through my life, that's kind of what's pulled me along. So from the food aspect, I started fairly young. When I was like 14, my uncle, my mom's brother, he had run a couple of ice cream shops, and he was a partner in the fortune cookie business, and so I would work in the summers with him, and sort of that was kind of my first sort of foot in the door of the food world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that was my introduction to it, and I found that I really liked it because it was great engaging with the customer. It was nice to make people sort of happy, and that was a fun thing. And then once I stepped away from that, my first kind of formal job away from sort of the family job was I worked at McDonald's, and that left a really deep impression on me. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you saw the film The Founder
I have,
with
yeah.
Michael Keaton, right? And I kind of like when I worked there, and I only was there for 3 months, and I was like 15 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I saw how the operations side works. It was just pure efficiency and consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people say McDonald's, well, that's kind of like, well, in the food business, that's kind of mass production. But there's a lot to be learned, right?
Yeah.
And I walked away understanding that there's a huge efficiency operational cost piece to it for how they think about things, how they literally measure the distance between one stove to the fryer. And I started out with that, and that was deeply attractive to me too. Beyond
Mm-hmm.
the creative food side, just the the blocking and the tackling of it. That was equally attractive to me.
See, that's
Right?
that's a different perspective than what I would think, right? Because McDonald's is a beautiful use case when it comes to the business industry, right? It's even the efficiency which you saw at 15 and a half was within the kitchen, right? So it's like the distance from, the time it takes from point A to point B to point C to point D to the customer's hands are all timed, right? It's like data was king for McDonald's. But
Yep.
they also applied the same concept from a real estate perspective, right? So the buildup of
Absolutely.
these places are exactly how you describe it. Like, this is the kit. This is how we acquire land. This is how we franchise it. This is how we build it. This is how we move it. Which has led to, in my opinion, McDonald's is the Ford of the food industry back in the day, right? The assembly line, Model T. Maybe that's a loose analogy, but it's interesting to have a conversation with you on that one because that's where you gain a lot of your foundational elements on how do you run a business, what's the efficiencies on it, you know, because there's a lot of talented people out there who are crap at running a business, and then that just ruins everything in that perspective.
Yeah, you have to recognize the relationship between the creative and the business aspect, and that thread runs through everything, right? Have you already alluded to Ford, and I know we'll talk a lot more, about COVID and how things are today, but they're intimately related.
Hmm.
Um, whether it's food or film or sorry about that,
No problem.
um, that's kind of the core of what you want to do creatively, like really good food. But at the end of the day, it's about how you get the food to the people you want to have enjoy it and what their experience is. It's no different than a movie or how their people's experience in terms of financial advice. It's relationships and how you deliver what your ultimate vision and goal is. So
Hmm.
I always thought it was tied together. And it's interesting because I listen to a lot of other podcasts and do a lot of reading. And a few years, this is before COVID, when we were about to sort of launch Chifa, I'd listened to a podcast with some of the heads of, with Tao Group. Right? I don't know if you've had the opportunity to get one of those guys, whether it's Noah Tepperberg or Jay Strout, on
No,
this podcast.
not yet.
They'd be great people to sort of hook up because they would talk about their experiences, how what they've learned. They're incredibly successful. They've developed incredible scale, but it's the real estate part of it is inextricably tied
Hmm.
to the restaurant business. And as we talk about what's happened in COVID, it's a key component you can't ignore in terms of how successful you are. Restaurants or even retail, right? The retail business we see is kind of dying out. The survivors are the ones who actually own their property
Hmm.
on their sheet.
Yeah.
So I know we're kind of taking sort of a tangent on to business, not food, but
No, but this is what's important, right? I know you're so officially you're probably every title in Chifa, but you are basically partner and chef, correct?
correct.
So what I love about this conversation is you understand every other aspect of the business, right? From creative to real estate. And what you picked up on here, and we're gonna dive into it. Like I'm like, who cares? Let's talk about the real estate aspect of it. Is you are 100% right. The people who are surviving are the ones where they're looking at that overhead not as rent, but how do I, you know, deal with whatever the financing is because I own it, right? Like I can manage the mortgage, I can manage something, through the relief that's actually occurring during COVID. And you're 100% right. Even the ones that have survived are the ones who have ownership of the building.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and
we
and,
have kind of
and
launched heavily. Sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
We sort of launched into this part of it, but I think it's important in terms of my story of how I've sort of progressed through this journey because it's an important element, but also one of the pieces that really interested me. So as I kind of switch hats and I go back to sort of the creative side of coming up with dishes and things like that, I have to dream big, but I have to then come back to earth and go, okay, let's put it through this lens, um, and trying to just find that balance. Sometimes I'm too heavy, one side, and I just have to find the right mix. But it's both aspects of the restaurant business really attracts me. The creative side, um, I think going back to my history after that, I'd actually stepped away and started working for. I went to school
Mm-hmm.
down at UC Irvine. In the summers, I would come back and work for a real estate development company, right? And so I stepped away from the food side, and then from there, it kind of launched me, into the finance investment management world. After I was there for 27 years after graduating, and then kind of had the opportunity to sort of do something different 4 years ago, and that's I came back to the food side of it.
Mm-hmm. What did you study at Irvine?
I was a social sciences, so it was a mix between economics, history, psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Which to me, when you think about the food industry, it has all the three elements too.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about food is that it's a great vehicle to tell stories, the history of cultures, of people, how recipes get, developed um, through the movement of people and cultures, whether they were through sort of happy events or, through unhappy events. The reality is that people have moved around and brought their recipes across the globe and have sort of found ways to sort of create different things out of it too. So
Yeah, we have a saying here at Phantom, right? We love to break boundaries by breaking bread, right? And that's the idea of how many people can you bring together at the table to discuss, it could be ideas, controversial ideas, it could be, red or, blue, whatever you want to have a conversation with. The table is a very good safe ground, in my opinion, to have those conversations. And that's where I want to push more into is like, when I think about that breaking bread scenario, we were almost deprived of it over the past 2 years, right? And I know even when you're in a restaurant setting, you're only sitting with the people that you know of to that event, but you also are in an ambiance where you can be influenced by the aesthetic that you've created within the environment, or the conversations are being overheard that are happening in the back of the house, if that's even possible in your location. So,
yeah,
let's talk about
yeah.
COVID, because you guys have an very interesting story. I'd almost, before I ruin it, I praise you on what you guys did during the period.
It was just circumstantial. I mean, none of it was really planned, obviously. Um, I think in terms of timing, we actually lucked out a bit because we had decided to start the restaurant in 2018, found the place and started to break ground, and then um, COVID hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of forced us to take a step back and say, okay, how does this change our world, right? And how should we approach this? Because you can no longer go gangbusters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in a way, because I kind of stepped into sort of the construction side of it, because I had retired from my other job. I was the only guy that didn't have work.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, you're the guy that's going to be out on site and build this place out. So I had no choice but to move forward, but
Mm-hmm.
I was new to this. So it gave me some wiggle room to go, okay, I can't go fast. And COVID's kind of allowing me the space to kind of take the time, all of us really, and then also think about how, if we start to open, kind of how can we do it? How can we do
Mm-hmm.
things differently? So I kind of, we always kind of joke that we said, look, we're just going to go into soft opening mode, and we're still in soft opening mode.
Yeah.
But I think COVID was, in a way, not necessarily a disruptor, but it's almost an accelerant of things that were kind of changing anyways, right, across the board. And I think besides the business, and you talk about breaking bread and missing the opportunity to see other people. I think one thing that COVID has allowed us to do is really take a step back and reflect and appreciate. Like, you don't appreciate things until you don't have them.
Yeah.
Right. And so whether it's, oh, wow, I really miss seeing other people, or cooking myself, or having just basic food, it's really fun. And it's also really hard to do.
Yeah.
And so hopefully it kind of opened people's eyes. So when we kind of go back to that again, we embrace it, and we're not, food, like you said, it's universal. I kind of joke, it's one of two things that we all do, right? We eat and we go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter age, gender, where you're from, we all engage in it. So it's a natural uniter, right? It's a common thing that everyone can sort of come together over. And COVID kind of let people really take a step back and appreciate it. And then what's important to me about food and what we've seen, what we tried to do at Chifa, is that it really needs to be approachable. The thing is that if everyone engages in it, but I don't want to create somewhere where only a segment of people feel comfortable doing it, or coming and sitting at this table, because you want as many people in that tent on that dinner table as you can. And if food is not approachable, if you're intimidated by it,
Correct.
you can't achieve it, you know?
Yeah, I'll tell you my one. I didn't try caviar, which is probably something I shouldn't be disclosing as is a staple in a lot of our events. But I probably didn't try caviar until we started this business, right?
Okay.
It was scary to me. I was like, whoa, what is this? This is weird, and I don't know why people love it and what's going on. So I get that concept, right? It's
Yeah.
how do you make people feel welcome and enjoy the food, because it's all senses, right? It's that personality. It's hey, how do I feel? Do I feel comfortable? Do I feel judged? Do I have to act a certain way? Like, these are all things that I probably learned when I was going from college to interviewing for jobs to being on-site interviews and a few things like that. It's so wild, you would think. And it's also our passport, right? Food is our passport into different cultures. It's our passport and a way of traveling across the globe without getting on an airplane. And I think we were deprived of both of that during COVID, right? Like, no travel and no going to restaurants. And what needed to happen was restaurants adapt to the to goes and things like that. I think what I hear with how you guys pushed it was that soft opening. Like, hey, let's start with to go orders because we're opening during COVID, and then we'll do some certain hours and then certain days for opening. So, I think what is probably more ideal, and I'm just making an assumption here, is that people had the ability to have your passport, when it says traveling, in probably the best light possible, because you optimized your menu for to go in the beginning, right? So that it wasn't just a plated meal that you threw into a box and you're like, oh, this is how life is today, right? I think there's a different mentality on how you guys approached it.
Yeah. I mean, our menu is kind of curated based on what we want to achieve, which is really, we think about Chifa as an extension of our family dinner table. And this kind of goes back to sort of my journey too, as well as, I've always been cooking. And my wife's family and my family, we have a long history of food. My father was really into food as well. And I think we have this sort of large library of things that we've cooked and passed down and cooked for our friends, and then we had kids. We wanted to share some of that. And my formal journey into doing the restaurant is I had partnered up with my mother-in-law Wendy to do sort of small events. So what we would do is sort of tag along with Umberto globally through his fashion shows and his other sort of launches, and started with just the people within his kind of business, and then it's gradually added people, and we kept repeating this. We kind of did this over, and then we just kept going. This is our family meal. At one point, we just said, "Hey, why don't we just do this as a business and just get a place and have this virtual dinner table and invite as many people to be part of this as we can?" And so that was the concept. And so that's kind of, we're trying to stay true to that, which is let's make this an extension of our house, and we want the experience to be that. And that kind of is the driver of what we decide, like what should we serve, how, or what should we create. This is not something I'm doing just for Chifa. This is something I would just do if we were eating at home.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been the driver. I think the COVID part is kind of allow us to kind of keep it limited, and then allow us to sort of expand comfortably.
Yeah.
I think in terms of timing, if we had opened a year before COVID, I think it would have been, it would have been hard, because we probably would have done what most restaurants do, which is 7 days a week, lunch and dinner, you know, huge staff. And, I'd gone to, my friends who were opening restaurants a month before COVID. They were in the middle of training,
Yeah.
and that all 6 months later, it was gone.
Yeah.
It was gone. And we could have easily been in that timeline. And it was just,
how was LA County? So I was in San Francisco. Right now I'm in Southern California. But during COVID, when we got the kind of shutdown mandate, what was it, the 3 weeks? It went silent. Like it was like a flat line throughout the industry from a commercial standpoint, from a retail standpoint. People weren't even on the street. And then it just started tagging along and along and along. So, you know, I almost feel for the people because you kept your staff on saying, hey, it's 3 weeks. Don't worry about it. Right. We'll come back. We've never seen this in our lifetime. Hey, don't worry about it. We'll come back. We'll come back. And then unfortunately, you just kind of get that burnout with everything that was happening. Yeah. So I guess the lucky bit here is you guys own the property, correct?
Correct.
And it was it built, custom built, or did you build it up, or was it a takeover and kind of remodel?
It was, I would say, it's probably a full remodel. I mean, it was a pet store before, so we had to convert it.
Yeah.
So it was. I mean, we took it down to the studs because when you go through construction, you don't really know what you're dealing with until you start pulling, and then you go, oh, well, that's and then this. So it actually turned out bigger than we thought.
Mm-hmm.
But we were able to sort of build it out fairly quickly, again, because my wife has her real estate business, so there's overlap there. Mm-hmm. Again, so I think we were fortunate in that, whether that was by design or just timing. I think we were just lucky in hindsight.
Yeah, I think somebody's smiling on you on that. So number one, making that decision to acquire, and then because you were doing a remodel from the studs, it gave you that time period to kind of get past that window of like that shutdown. So it put you in a I'd say an ideal position to be ready for what's going to come at you, right? And I think when I look at and I hear your story, right, it's starting at McDonald's to spending 27 years in private investments, right? To then saying, hey, I'm going back to my 5 principles of the F's, right? Make it fun too, and going into a business where you've basically sandwiched creative and business and family, right? That group, to where you've created a brand that kind of ripples across. And to be honest, you might give credit to whoever you need to give credit to, but I give credit to you because at the end of the day, that is not an easy thing to do, and it's amazing to hear this story.
Again, it's just I've got a strong support network. My wife is the core of all of this. I mean, we met at the investment firm. So if I didn't go there, we never would have met, and then this wouldn't have happened. So that's the other sort of fortuitous thing that when it's not even a detour. This is just kind of my journey.
Yeah.
But maybe I can ask you too. I mean, for Phantom.
Mm-hmm.
Not knowing your full timeline, I mean, COVID. How did COVID influence what you guys are doing, or how you approached it?
Yeah,
there's a reason for it. I don't.
Yeah, and it kind of goes to what you picked up on. So we realized, talking to a lot of our network in the industry, that having that overhead, especially in San Francisco, of paying the rent, right? You could be paying $25,000 a month for 2,000 square feet in the financial district or wherever it might be, was just unsustainable. And so as we started working with people and saying, okay, we've got a bunch of furloughed people who are extremely talented, who haven't exercised their brain into thinking, how do we adapt to what's currently happening, right? It was a wait and see game. And a lot of these folks were actually given a break for the first time in 20 plus years. And so what we did was we kind of mashed the two together, and we said, okay, how do we use underutilized space to create private events and pay the people who need it the most, the landlords, the restaurant owners, and the people who are creating amazing food. And we paired it with a business perspective to where a lot of people still had the urge to dine in safe matters, right? So outdoors, at people's homes. And we created this almost layer to where we were connecting the people in the industry to drive alternative sources of revenue and innovation, right? So it's exactly what you were talking about when it comes to Chifa is like this blend of a lot of, here's a little bit of my value add, here's my mother-in-law's value add, my wife's value add, here's my brother-in-law's value add, and a lot of these things. We're doing that and trying to push that across not only restaurants in a certain region, but across cities and ultimately across geos, right? And I think this is where we're going to see a lot of the transformation occur in the industry is where you can get a lot of people to cross collaborate, cross pollinate, and expose each other to create this rising tide. And then that's kind of the statement we always say is like, hey, the rising tide lifts all boats. We want to lift all boats in this industry because, restaurant relief, PPP, I don't expect that ever to be coming back. And there's a lot of people who are frustrated around that situation. I think there needs to be a foundational change to how we look at this business and how we adapt it so that we're not putting anybody out of business, right? And we're helping each other, and that's kind of where my move is to try to push this. It's almost the anti DoorDash. It's almost the anti, you know, I know we praise McDonald's, but anti McDonald's, anti Wendy's, right? Anti cloud kitchens, because these are the drivers where I'm seeing a pressure get pushed onto the industry to where, mom and pop, single, 2, 3 location restaurants are feeling the squeeze. And it's hard to compete against, right? That is a David and Goliath situation. And there needs to be a change in that sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we haven't even talked about how policy, like, government policy impacts all of this. But I think the one thing you did touch on is that the spirit of collaboration it's fantastic. It's definitely out there more than I'm used to, whether it's within this industry or any other sort of creative endeavor, probably even business as well. So I think that's very encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I find, if you take a step back, I'm a huge history buff. One of my passions is history, and that's why I love food as well, because food is another great way to teach history. If you kind of take the 30,000 foot view level, we're really at an inflection point. Mm-hmm. And COVID is just one of the lubricants that's moving things along across the board, whether it's technology, finance, entertainment, food, you name it. The things that we're about to change, whether, work mobility, how to run a restaurant, how we get our entertainment was changing anyways, and it was dragging. And the whole thing that's behind this is that we're in the middle of a generational change, is that there is a demographic shift. The boomers are in this retirement world. Mm-hmm. They have, their sphere of what they like, and they're about to transfer all this wealth. The younger generations are taking over, and what they like to eat, what they want to watch, everything is different. And I know before COVID, when I was even at the finance, they were like, work from home. There's no way.
Yeah.
There's no, I gotta see you. I need to see you right here. Mm-hmm. That's changed. And COVID just basically was a foot in the butt to go, you're not going to take 10, 15 years to get there. Yeah. It's going to happen now. Mm-hmm. Right? And if you think about it, streaming, all of it.
Yeah.
All of it is changing, and COVID is the lubricant that is launching us into that next phase, and everybody kind of is now hopefully getting their minds around how the world is going to be after this.
Yeah.
And it's don't COVID is just a grain in the sand on the beach. This is just a mass generational change.
Mm-hmm. It's a massive ripple effect, and this is like even outside of talking about the food industry. Like, when you look at healthcare, the amount of money that has been invested into healthcare now, or biotech is booming, right? If you look at how the workforce, is operating now, you're looking at commercial real estate as a flexible model. So you see a boom kind of coming in there. When you think about where you're going to hire, right? You can now hire very talented people cross city. They don't have to be in San Francisco, LA, or New York, or think of those cities. You could be in Raleigh, North Carolina. Well, to be honest, that's an innovators hub, anyways, too. But let me think of another city. And so that's really cool. And then you've got this move of decentralization, and that's not only from a financial perspective, right, with blockchain and cryptocurrency, but the workforce and how we're approaching a lot of issues, right? When it comes to infrastructure, we're adapting to increased technology and internet coverage and, rollout of 5G, which is probably planned before, but now it's an accelerant. So you see all this happening. I'm sure a lot of things will break, but that's life, right? We don't do anything without breaking it.
It's supposed to break.
Yeah.
And if you bring that like down to the back to the restaurant level, there are things that we have to think and consider, and they'll be different. And as you bring people along as part of our team, there's people with a lot of experience, but you'll find you have to get them comfortable with the change. Because the restaurant business, notorious like, oh, you can't do it that way. You can't. Well, maybe you can.
Yeah, you can do it anyway you want it to, and that's where I'm excited about this industry. I think it's operators, chef partners, creatives like yourself and the team at Chifa that are really thinking differently, right? It's associating, yourself and how you guys started out, right? It's like, you go to Fashion Week, you'd cook for people like they were your family. And then you're building it into brick and mortar, cooking for people like they're your family. So for me, what will be interesting, and hopefully I could steal you, John, for a few events with our members is, but how do we make more people feel like family? And I think that's the move we should all be striving towards, right? Let's make everybody in this world, regardless of their thoughts, their feelings, their prejudice, family, because that will open up their eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right,
this
John.
comes back. How would you feel? What would you like as someone who enjoys and loves food? If you start there, that's a great place to think.
Yeah, it's that sense of comfort that needs to occur, which you picked up on that earlier. It's, when somebody walks into a room, do they feel welcome or do they feel unwelcome? And food is a great way to connect people together, to make them feel welcome, assuming you could portray it in the right way, and and that's, I think that's what makes me excited about what you're doing specifically. I'm probably going to roll around this week with my wife to
Awesome.
check out Chifa, and I'm going to eat some good eats. But for anybody who's listening, I know we're running out of time. Where do we go? How do we find you? How can they message you directly? I want everybody to know.
Well, if you're on Instagram, you can follow us, please, at Chifa-LA. We are located in Eagle Rock, so that's just a few minutes outside of downtown LA at specifically 4374 Eagle Rock Boulevard, at the intersection of Eagle Rock Boulevard and York. So that's where we are. We're a bright green jade color building with a big red sign.
Nice. Amazing.
And so visit our website. You can make reservations there. And look forward to seeing you.
And if not, go to their Instagram and harass them, because they, we'll be posting, and harass them in a good way. What do I mean? Because I'll be watching. But we'll do some reposts on the Phantom Instagram, on Chifa, so you guys have a quick link into who they are and follow them. Definitely, I think this something that we definitely all need to taste because we're all part of John's family now. So this is good.
Yes.
Cool.
I'll be borrowing money from you. No, just kidding.
I love it. All right, John. I do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule for chatting about your business and talking about so many different and amazing topics, right? And your story to where you started to where you are now is fantastic. I can't wait for the next 6 months to 2 years to 10 years to see what you're going to be doing.
Awesome. Awesome. You remember the TV show Cheers? I mean, I'm dating myself. This was back in the 80s. Have you heard Cheers?
Yeah, I've heard of Cheers, yeah.
Well, you know the opening song where everybody knows your name?
No, I don't.
Basically, everyone wants to be somewhere where they know your name.
Yeah.
And that's the lesson. That's the lesson of the day, right?
And we'll ingrain that. Maybe that'll be the title of this podcast.
All right.
All right. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Bill.